So the big question is this: how are those in the self-storage industry like us going to be successful in today's market? That's the question, and this show will give you the answers. My name is Jim Ross, and welcome to the Self-Storage Show. Hi everyone, this is Jim Ross from the Self-Storage Show. This episode, we're continuing our series on for Inside Self-Storage Speaker Spotlight. And today I got Brett Hatcher. He's the Senior Vice President of Investment at Marcus Millichap. How's it going, Brett?
Going very well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for making the time. I'm sure you're extremely busy, so I'm glad you had some time to discuss this a little bit.
Absolutely.
I saw you're going to be speaking at ISS coming up here, in Vegas in April. It's going to
First week of April.
be here before we know it, so I'm glad glad we're able to find some time. And obviously, in your sector, in your business, you're talking about storage investment market, and kind of that 3 to 30,000 foot view of how the market's going. So please just kind of take it away and kind of talk a little bit about that, and I'll jump in when I can.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So when I speak in Las Vegas, we're going to talk about the view from 30,000 feet. Of the overall investment market. And I'll delve into some topics here in a second. But it's really the self-storage industry. It used to be kind of the redheaded stepchild. Nobody really was interested into it, and as some of the sub-market, some of the retail is starting to, not go so well. And some of those developers are pulling back. The apartment market's been, red hot for so long, and, lenders are starting to pull back on that, where apartments are starting to, some of those investors or developers are looking to get into it, and then you have just your group of people who have been in self-storage for a long time who are looking to continue to grow. So the airspace has become much more crowded. The amount of funds out there with $100 million, I wouldn't say they're a dime a dozen, but there are a lot of, 9-figure funds out there chasing self-storage deals, and being very competitive in that. We've seen the market be extremely strong for, I think we started getting some normalcy back in 2012, and it continued to get back to normal. And really in 13, things started looking really good. In 14, 15, we became like, oh wow, self-storage values are pretty good. Now you may think about selling. And then 16, I think you were peaking in 16, but you peaked in 16, but it stayed pretty much there from 16, 17, and even into the first part of 18. We've taken a slight hit. Everything's cyclical. We're going to see it go backwards a little bit. We're not going to stay up here forever.
Sure.
But when interest rates started, to go up, used to be borrowing, 4, some of them sub 4, but typically you're in that 4% range. And, now you're looking at, a bank that's looking at 5%, CMBS is 5.5, 5.8, so you're seeing these interest rates go up. So it'll obviously have an effect on the self-storage value because the cost of capital and the return they need for their investors. So, as you've seen the market continue through that, we've kind of come down a little bit off the peak of 16, but realistically, it's still one of the strongest markets we've ever seen in self-storage in regards to sellers. The development aspect of it from 2009 to 2013 was very, very quiet.
Yeah.
14, some of the bullish, some of the seasoned veterans of development world got back in the game, and kind of in 13, but really in 14, 15, and then now you're seeing the amount of new developers in the airspace probably double, if not triple, in the last 2 years.
Seriously.
It was interesting. We were in New York for a convention, self-storage, the New York show,
yeah.
and a big part of we were talking about it, and as everybody is talking about, is looking at the development market. I mean, because that is what is going to probably push us down. I mean, it's already pushing rates down. You look at markets like Dallas, like Denver, they're putting 20% increase of supply on in the last 3, and it's going to be 5 years by the time it's all said and done. The amount of square feet that they're putting, and when we get to my presentation in Vegas, we'll have a lot of slides that'll show square footage numbers and stuff like that. But when you're looking at this from a higher level, the amount of inventory that's been put in Denver, Dallas, the Carolinas, Miami, Raleigh, in some of these markets, it's just there was undersupply. Now we're pushing oversupply. So the question is, how quickly can they soak up some of that new square footage that's out there? Do they drop the rates? Do some of these properties that these guys were speculating getting $200 for a 10 by 10, now they get $160 for a 10 by 10. Does their development work? The idea is still a lot of these investors and developers, even though they discount the rent on the front end, they're going to bump the rates and get it back up there.
Yeah.
So the question is, can they truly get those numbers back up to those numbers? So that's our biggest unknown right now is, that was a big part of the panels. The New York show was fabulous, and there was a panel of large owners. There was a panel of information groups, and the big question was, like, do you see construction costs are up, labor costs are up, steel costs are up, getting it entitled is not as easy. So the level of risk for the developer has gone up, and some of these developers are starting to get. Matter of fact, I looked at 3 land deals today that are entitled. Originally they'd be coming to me saying, "Listen, I want to sell this at CO." The CO market is very thin. You really got to be that main location, Class A. Rents are growing in the market, population's growing in the market for them to jump on a true CO deal. There's a couple private equity groups out there chasing those, and then there's a couple of the REITs that have purchased them. A lot of times they have a really good relationship with that developer who they do the CO deal with. So the CO market, for all intents and purposes, is very, very slim. I mean, I sold one last month in Indianapolis, so it's not like dried up by any means. But you got to be building the right product. You got to have the right story of, like, here's the rents in the markets, here's my construction costs, here's my carry costs, here's within 3 years your break even, you're going to be making money, and there has to be a story when you're looking at the path to profit for a future investor. So the biggest, unknown out there in the market is the development. When does it slow down? How long will it take to get saturated? Will some of these properties go back? At the end of the day, the properties aren't going to go back. It could be underwater for 2-3 years, but if they can fill it up and the interest only, and they could be fine down the road. So we don't know if there's going to be a fallout on some of them. It'll never. I mean, knock on wood, I don't think it's going to be like anything we had in 7 and 8, 9, but you're still going to see some development deals where these developers push through construction development, when they probably should have sat on it for a while because steel goes up, labor costs go up, and instead they went through and build it, or it's a developer that wasn't necessarily in the market, and they thought they were going to build the fanciest new place. They overspent on the development. At the end of the day, number one thing is cost. Number two thing is convenience and self-storage. So, you do have to make it an experience. StoreQuest, Bill Hoban gave a speech at a show in the past, and he's talking about making that an experience. And not to say self-storage can't be a great experience for a tenant, but at the end of the day, is it going to get you a lot more rent? Typically, the answer is no. You can have the wine room and the wine, you can have everything, everything there. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make a lot more money versus the guy down the road who just has a clean, climate-controlled unit that is safe and secure and been around and is well lit. So there's a lot of that going on in the market. So when I look at where we are, that goes back to our biggest outlier. The stabilized properties are still very highly sought after. If you own one of those and they're considering selling, you're in probably the 7th, 8th, early 9th inning of a cycle. Typically cycles are 9 years. We've been in ours for a little over 9. I think that's because we were so deep in the recession prior to coming out of it that I think we're going to have a little bit of a hangover and stay a little bit longer in the bull market. But everybody's bull. Everybody you really seem to talk to is very bullish on the market, excluding the development side. People are getting a little more bearish to that extent. And to go through some of the 5 things and these are like my 5 bullet points that we're going to talk about when we're in Las Vegas is, what's occurring with the value of existing self-storage facility properties. Some of the markets are becoming more flat. I'm going to really delve into that when we each market individually, because some of the rates stay flat your value is going to stay flat. And matter of fact, your rates stay flat or they're slightly down, like a Dallas or a Denver market, and you're losing a little bit of your revenue. I had a property that I sold last year that was right next to a brand new development right beside it, and it was down $27,000. After the first year, they maintained and they did a good job as a Class A. They were able to hang in there and keep the value and brought it back up. But that's always gonna kind of ruffle the feathers of an existing property. But if you're an existing storage facility, values are still at all-time highs. The amount of equity that's out there in the market chasing is incredible. Interest rates are still at historically lows. I mean, historically lows, when I got in the business 13, 14 years ago, it was 6%, 6.5%. We were happy with that. Now everybody's got used to 4%, and we're in the fives, but still fives is phenomenal.
Still insane. Yeah, it's great.
Amazing.
Yep.
So, and it says, the other thing we're talking about, what are the hottest markets to build and own self-storage? We're going to go through that. We'll look at, there's not a lot of hot markets necessarily, but there are pockets that could be in there. We're going to talk about that and have some slides on that. And which markets are being overbuilt. I mentioned Denver, Dallas, and Miami a little bit. There are some of those, the main ones, but, it's starting to squeak into everywhere from, I'm from Columbus, Ohio. From Columbus, Ohio, it's starting to get to that point as well. And how to value new self-storage developments. I mean, I could talk for an hour on this, and especially as I've looked at a lot lately where it's very gray when you're looking at it at that instant, because all of it is speculation. So for me to say, that property is going to be worth $10 million, I may be right, I may be undervaluing, but I'm going to look, a big thing I'm going to look at is how many square feet per person are in the area. Some markets, I think it's a 7, you need 7 square feet is kind of the average. Some of them it could be 4. It depends on where you are. Are there basements? Is it, more rural? Everything like that. I look at that. That's very important. I look at the rents in the market. That's the number one. What's the occupancy of those properties that you're competing at? Because everybody's, if you've tracked the rates for 2 years and they're growing up and everybody's 95% full, that's a great market to be building in. I like to see the trend of the rent growth in there. On the flip side, it may be flat, and you may think that a lot of developers, send me stuff and then they say, well, I'm going to be building the climate control building, and that's an old property, and all their climate control is full, but, they have 5,000 square feet of climate and then 90,000 of non-climate. So, can the market take the saturation of that much climate control, and are you really going to get the premium? Sometimes you're not going to get those premiums, especially in a lot of these conversion deals. It's becoming more helter-skelter on whether, like if it's a dying retailer, sometimes it can be a dying, self-storage market. But there are times that, they're still needed. It's a very quick way to build. Obviously, with Sears and some of the groups going out, there's a lot of vacant space out there. So we're seeing that double. We've seen that double year over year the last 2 years, the amount of people trying to convert big box. So there's no secret anymore. And the last thing we're going to talk about is how to adjust. How to adjust to the market changes, including if somebody builds next to you. And that can be some management tactics. Not that I'm big into the management, but I'm watching some of my clients have to weather the storm, next door. It really does come down to managers. It comes down to management. It comes down to your exposure on the internet. It comes down to tightening your expenses, and that's what I think it was the Extra Space group was speaking in New York, and they've said, everybody in the next year is going to be right now. Everybody's focused on their taxes because everybody's got them hiked up here in the last couple of years. But everybody's going to start looking at your expenses because you're at the end of the day right now. Let's say you build a new facility, or the guy next to you build a new one. You can only control so much on getting renters in, keeping your rates competitive with the market. That's hard to control in the sense of how many people you can get in, but you can control your expenses. So expense control is going to be a very important thing over the next year, and finding a way to kind of weather that storm if somebody does, and in fact, build next to you. So those are the 30,000 feet up is the main, on the investment market, but we're going to dive into those 5 bullet points, and we're going to get some statistics and some great slides. And, I look forward to it. I did it a few years back and really got a great response. And in today's market, with everything moving the way it is, with the amount of developments, with the interest rates, with the economy, with the, how are buyers thinking? I have a group of, we're now up to 8 self-storage specialists on my team. 2 are based out of California, and then we have 7 in the Midwest. We're hitting the ears of the ground all the time. So, it's important to always be in touch, whether it's with great folks like yourself or, I put on a webinar. If you go to the hatchergroup.org, I do that, or .net, excuse me, hatchergroup.net. I put on webinars because, as a newer investor, if anybody's looking to get into it, it's important to educate yourself in today's market.
Say that, don't want to gloss over that. That's very important. So, hatchergroup.com, you said, or .net?
.net. I think it's thehatchergroup.net.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll put that in the resources too. No, good to know because we were talking about that previously before we started recording. It's educating. It's so vitally important because again, you're talking about development, and the more educated you are, the better for everybody when they get into this. You don't want to be making a big mistake. So I'm thinking with all what you just talked about and your bullet points, I think the whole synopsis of this is be educated, know what you're getting into, and so don't be dumb. Albert, there we go. Albert, I'm going to retitle your presentation for you. Don't be dumb before
Yeah,
you get to storage.
Understand. And I've tried to stop some people from doing things, and you know what? People are going to do what their investors and developers are going to do what they're going to do, and I'm not right all the time, but it is important to educate yourself as the market continues to move, and especially on a cycle that we're in. You got to be careful when you're building. Like I said, just because Denver is and Dallas are being overbuilt, there's still pockets in there that could be great development. So
Sure.
You say MSAs as a whole, but really there's still opportunities out there. You just have to really understand it, work with people who understand it, because you can. I mean, you got to preserve your wealth you build. It's very easy to I want to get in self storage. I want to get self storage instead of putting $1 million in the market. You put in the storage facility, and then all of a sudden interest rates go to 7%, and you got to go refinance it here in 5 years. And your interest rate was 5%, now it's 7%, and it was pretty thin before. And now all of a sudden your debt coverage ratio doesn't look as good, and you might be in a situation where you have to put more money into the deal, and the bank may say, well, yeah, I'm going to need another $300,000 from you. You may or may not have that. Hopefully you do, but that's what happened in 6, 7, or in 7 and 8. That the bank stopped lending, and then they started calling some of these, when they're getting audited, calling some of these notes, they're not correct, or they're not right, or so they asked for capital injections, and then some of these developers and owners didn't have it, and inevitably lost the properties.
That's my worst nightmare. I know of a few that went through that, so yeah, that's a nightmare. Well, anyway, let's wrap this up here. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I think just from listening to you talking and hearing what you're going to be talking about, this presentation is going to provide a ton of value. So yeah, if you guys are at ISS, definitely go check Brett out here. It's Tuesday, April 2nd you're presenting. So
Yep.
bright and early, 9 o'clock. So good.
Yeah. At least it's day one, so we'll be all right.
Oh, that is day one, huh? Yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah, I kind of do. Monday's like kind of the kid, but that's your big start
The
day.
first presentation day. Yep, good.
Yeah.
Be over and done with. So perfect. Well, I will see you there as well. Thank you again for taking the time and being on here, Brett. And again, give out that domain one more time for the webinar.
It is thehatchergroup.net. That is our website. Go on there. We have a couple. I think we did 3 in 2018, and we'll be doing one every quarter to keep everybody kind of in the loop with what's going on.
Cool. Again, that's all about educating. That's why you're doing that, and that's why you're presenting at ISS. So I'm looking forward to it, man. Thanks a lot, Brett.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.